Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Rural Initiatives Planning Advisory Committee meeting for July the 27th, 2021. We have direct your attention to the published agenda, and if there are any additions, please let us know at this point. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Tom and Dominique will second. All in favor?
Warden Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Donna Lunn.
Yes.
And Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
4-0, the motion is.
Okay. Donna, I don't know if you're aware of your participation outline, but you're here on an advisory capacity and unfortunately as a non-voting member. You were aware of that, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So don't be offended if we don't call you for the vote.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. The minutes from the previous meeting of June the 29th, 2021 were circulated. If there are no errors or omissions, I would entertain a motion to adopt.
Moved by Sally.
Thank you, Sally. Seconded by Dominique. All in favor?
Warden Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
4-0, the motion is.
Thank you. And at this time, I would remind everyone to disclose pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Seeing none, let us move on then with item 4, which is the What We Heard report number 2. Nancy?
Good morning, everyone. Through you, Mr. Chair. What we heard number 2 is a summary of the stakeholder discussions that we've conducted so far. These are the major groups that were identified through the planning process. So these are people that normally comment on any planning applications. So those are considered to be major stakeholders at this time, as well as anyone else that was identified through the public or through other avenues. What we heard lists the major topics that were identified through those discussions with the major stakeholders, as well as some of the community groups that provided commentary, as well as the local municipalities, all 7 of them. The report then lists the next steps and discussion papers that will be prepared and provided as we move forward through this process with anticipated target dates for council meetings as well as to the public. So I'm available for any questions.
Well, thank you. Does anyone have any comment and or questions for Nancy on the second report? Yeah, Dominique?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I was wondering if we could hear a little bit more about the stakeholder groups. And I know you mentioned, I think in the report that you've been accumulating a list and wondering if you're satisfied. I know we've invested quite a bit of time in developing the engagement strategy with the evaluation and the criteria of how we're going to reach out. So I'm trying to gauge, are you satisfied? Like, how are we doing relative to the strategy that we set up?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so far, I am actually quite pleased with the level of response that we've received, considering we are still technically in a pandemic and we have not been able to do normal face-to-face type of engagements where we would be more, able to get out to the community and discuss things with individuals. So through these virtual meetings that we've been able to have, I think we've been able to connect with definitely the major stakeholders, such as the conservation authorities, the Southwest Public Health, those types of individuals that would normally have the biggest, I would say, stake in terms of the official plan itself. But of course, we're always going to be moving through this process. And now that the pandemic has changed, and hopefully we'll be able to get out to the public more, we're always going to be adding to that list. Trying to find ways to connect with people in the future, do more face-to-face and one-on-one time if we can, all of those things hopefully moving forward. So, so far so good, I think, but always room for improvement, obviously. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Nancy? Yep, Dominique?
Mr. Chair, just as a follow-up, so I'm wondering if you, I know we had talked about how we would analyze who has contributed and if there are any gaps, or do you feel there are any gaps in terms of community groups? Like I think if I saw, like, we have one community, Stanley, but are there other community groups across the county who may not have heard about this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, oh, sorry.
I'm thinking community groups, because I feel that maybe we only have one. Then I'm thinking on the business side, who I would think would be stakeholders who, because of, development and property and taxes. So I don't know if I saw any businesses. So like I said, we had said we would look at who responded and then look at whether there were any gaps and then maybe proactively reach out. So any thoughts or any plans for that, like to supplement a little bit of what we heard?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, two things. Number one, we do have a list of all of the tourism and businesses in Elgin County. And so we've been targeting them with our emails as it's been going out and with every update, we've been letting them know as well. I think a lot of them have signed up through the public component. You know, because we've asked them to, especially with Engage Elgin, now that we've moved onto that platform, we've asked people to re-sign up. So I think a lot of people have signed up individually on behalf of their corporation, for instance. Secondly, the community groups, we've also have a list, actually a very fulsome list of community groups that we have been regularly targeting as well. Unfortunately, I think community groups, because they're volunteer based, often it's difficult for them. Maybe it could be volume of emails or what have you. But it's difficult to engage with them or ensure that they're actually receiving the information, providing comments. We got comments from Port Stanley. Lensla is, one could say, is kind of a community group, and as well as the Wind Turbine. They had also provided comments as well, but we do have a robust list. It's, I think, as again, moving forward, as the pandemic sort of lifts, I think we'll be able to try to make more of those connections and analyze those gaps. So we'll have to figure out a good strategy then to make sure that they're providing their comments and that they're receiving information, that they're interested and engaged. So we'll have to figure out some additional ways of outreach going forward.
Okay.
Yep, carry on, Dominic.
To clarify that, so some of these groups, did you reach out to them and offer them a meeting? And so did you do that with all of the other community groups that you have on your list? Like how did you pick sort of who you proactively offered a meeting to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the community groups let themselves be known if they wanted to engage with us. So for instance, Lensla and Port Stanley provided written comments. That was not, so we didn't offer to meet with them in person. But some of the other groups as well, we did offer, and the major stakeholders basically were the ones that we had attempted to engage virtually. But in terms of all the community associations, there's a lot of them. So certainly if in the next stage, we can do a more fulsome job of engaging them and ensuring that we can also meet with them face to face or virtually to ensure that they're engaged. So I think we would need to probably have a discussion among staff to determine what are those major community associations, because there's a lot of them that I think may not be engaged or may not want to offer any comments, but others that may want to be providing comments. I think I would also rely then on maybe some, like I said, staff or even counselors that have a knowledge of community associations that are very active and vocal that would can be reached out to. Yeah.
Okay, to summarize then, Nancy, every effort is being made to reach these groups and hopefully they'll offer comment, but if they choose not to, we can't force them to do that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Fortunately, like I said, it's a product of a lot of these are volunteer organizations that maybe don't have the time or ability to provide fulsome comments through a process like this. So.
Absolutely. And given the nature of the environment we're in, it's a relatively new consultation process and it's not as comfortable operating online or on the phone as it is in person. So I appreciate that. But I would encourage everyone who has any comment to participate. Yeah. Julie?
Chair, if I may, does the committee have a desire to see that list and comment on it directly and fill in and play a role in filling in the gaps?
if you think there's value in it, I don't oppose the idea. Is that all right with you, Sally?
Fine with me. Yep.
Okay. Donna?
Fine, yeah.
Okay,
So with your consent, we'll distribute that by email.
sure. That'd be great. Sally, do you have any questions for staff on the second report, what we heard?
No, I don't. And I must admit, my internet keeps cutting in and out. So I did miss some of the comments, but I read it thoroughly, so I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Donna?
No, that's good. I'm still reading both reports, 1 and 2, and we'll participate more fully through the Federation as well for more feedback
Sure.
for the third report, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. And just to summarize again, Nancy, the intention of the what we heard report 2, where's it go from here?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So through this, it recommended the discussion papers that have now also have target dates associated with them, and those will be brought forward at regular intervals. So these were the major issues that came out through the public and stakeholder discussions. And ultimately, then it also sets out the rest of the process, which is the targeted draft population projections, land needs assessment, as well as then reports number 3 and 4 for what we heard. And that would be a summary of comments thus far, and then ultimately recommended draft policy.
Absolutely. I guess what I was digging for was, is the intention to circulate what we heard to the various interested parties, including the local municipal partners.
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. It will be, all of these reports will be ultimately on our Engage Elgin website. We will have mass emails in order to let people know of the various products that are now available, as well as, and that will be to all of our circulation lists, which is at this point 500 plus people, I believe. So, yes, so we'll be ensuring that everyone is aware of these comments. Aware of these reports and can provide comments on them. And as you'll see through discussion paper number 1 and number 2, we also have some additional engagement pieces that we're going to be working on too.
Thank you for that. If there's nothing further on this topic, then we have a proposed motion that reads, be it resolved that the report titled What We Heard number 2 from the Manager of Planning be received and filed. Moved by Tom, seconded by,
Sally?
we'll take Sally. All in favor?
Warden Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiba.
Yes.
4-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Moving on then with the discussion papers, and I'm going to put it up to the committee and ask what their preference is. You've got 2 before you. The first one is on servicing and development, and the second one is on the provincial policy statement and provincial policy guideline changes. I'm going to ask for staff's interpretation. What would be the better order? Is the order presented the order you think we should follow, or would you look to receive the provincial policy statement first?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can do it the way that we have them listed. Discussion paper number 1 can be discussed first. I think they're separate enough that we can have discussions on each of them in the order that we provided.
Okay, then let's proceed then with discussion paper number 1.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this report focuses on development with full or partial or no municipal servicing. It looks at provincial servicing hierarchy, our local county policies that exist, and adjacent municipalities and their policy related to servicing and development. This report also looks at 5 potential policy options that will be discussed and we'll get comment on from the public with respect to that. Our next steps include circulation and review by the public. We'll be developing a survey for our Engage Elgin website, which will ask people their opinion on this type of, on these different types of scenarios, and virtual open house with a presentation as well. Available for any questions on this.
Thank you. Any questions for staff on this first discussion paper?
Just, Counselor Ketchiba, Sally Martin.
Yep.
I
Please.
would just, I'm curious in one sense that the province are changing their policies slightly on development. Central Ogden have always gone with full services only for subdivisions. We've allowed hamlets infilling as long as it's big enough. But the important thing is we don't want to infringe on more agricultural land, in my opinion. And so it's very important, I think, that we go to more intensified forms of housing, such as apartment buildings and such on, or house on very much smaller lots. In the rural area, if you develop on a lot, it has to be quite large in order to have your own source of water and your own sewage system. I realize I live on one of those, but I just think in the future, we really need to not be infringing any more on our farmland because it's absolutely vital to our livelihood. So I think encouraging development to be centered around urban areas where we're not infringing as much on farmland and having full services to keep the lot smaller. Just a thought.
Thank you for those comments. Yep, Dominique?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was wondering if you could expand, Nancy, on the survey. You said there might be a survey to that would be associated with the discussion paper, because I know what I was thinking after reading this, because it's called the discussion paper, I'd be looking for what are the discussion points. I know you have 5 options, but sometimes like it helps if maybe an executive summary that has a few prompts to think about, not so much just, I think there's more to discuss than just a comparison of the 5 options. Like some of the points that Sally was mentioning, like some of the consequences and some of our past practices. So what, yeah, I was wondering if that would round up the document in and of itself, even without the survey, just as a standalone, if maybe either at the beginning, say, here's some prompts, like some things to think about, things that we want to discuss. That's why we created a discussion paper. So you set the stage at the beginning, and then as you read through all the background and the history and how the policies have evolved, then you've got these sort of questions. So that's one suggestion, that otherwise it's a good comprehensive paper.
Great. Those are great points. Through you, Mr. Chair, those are great points. Thank you.
Just to add to that comment, Councillor Shigeru would argue that there are subtle differences between options 1 and 2. And, you know, perhaps a little more description of what's going on in those 2 options and to just differentiate them a little more, I think would be beneficial. In fact, the first 3 options are closely related, and just to have a better understanding of what the critical areas are that we need to understand. I too like the discussion paper, just as a general comment. I think it's a nice stepping off point to get a more fulsome discussion going on. I think that while recognizing the need for intensification, which I think is something that we want to do in order to preserve, you know, the general goal of perhaps preserving agricultural resources and, you know, trying to not have spillover effects. But at the same time, in order to achieve a lot of that, I think we have to be flexible and we have to have out of the box thinking in order to get there. So it is, in my mind, a science-based approach that we need to think about. But then again, I'm biased. So, Sally, you had some comments. Donna, do you have anything to offer?
I would just say that I agree with having a little more discussion at a preamble, because there is a lot of consequences that we're seeing today already with such a lot of climate change, that when something hits us like a catastrophe of a drought, or heavens, if we ever got those fires that we've got out west or up north, that we are bereft of food. And we do need to protect this great resource that we do have here. And so I do agree that we try to mitigate any of the sprawling effect of development onto good farmland. And I think that if we look at some of the preamble, we can sort of set a stage. And with the Federation, the Ontario Federation, really with their paper out this year as well, with so much farmland already that we're losing every day, that people maybe just need to take note of that, because a lot of consumers just go to the store and get their food and don't realize that we have a growing cycle out here, and we're blessed in this county to have the resources. So I do think it's important to have a preamble.
Thank you for those comments. You
Just
know, it's
one other,
interesting. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead,
Ed.
Sally, please.
Just one other comment, and that was on the communal, either sewage or water servicing. We had that issue in Central Elgin quite a few years ago. We had a community that was on a communal water service, and we eventually had to move in, bring a pipeline into there and take it over, because it was just impossible to continue to maintain safe water. So just a heads up that that's something as a point that people need to be told, because it can lead to a major problem later.
Yep, thank you for that, Sally. Bayham's had a similar experience with the Village of Richmond. You know, it's interesting, Donna, and you mentioned climate change and the two or three components you've identified. There's also the larger one that we're facing right at the moment, which is stormwater management, because of the excessive rainfall events. And these systems were not designed for the volume that we tend to get these days. So I think there's a relationship hand in glove of, shall we call it, infilling development versus plans of subdivision, whereas some of these stormwater management systems aren't fully developed. So what I'm envisioning is a larger tract of land, but if you're infilling only in a tier 2, tier 3 facility or land or settlement area, you're only putting a stormwater system in for 4 or 5 lots. And yet the rest of that property, which is still within a village boundary, will eventually get developed. And you're going to end up with a mismatch of, I would almost suggest, an inappropriate servicing level at the end of the day. So there's a trade-off between infilling or plans of subdivision. And that's why I'm saying we need to have some out of the box, really good discussion and really define a solution that actually will mitigate these problems down the road. But you're right also, Sally, when you suggest that sometimes good intentions and communal systems end up in the hands of municipalities and added costs, something we didn't want. So there are trade-offs, and a lot of thinking has to be done on this. Yep, Tom?
Former counselor gave me a lot of good advice over the years, and I think a statement was that, you know, we have to be very careful not to leave the best decisions we make may lead to a problem for a future council. And I don't think many times, the issues we're dealing with, they're left from a previous council. We have to deal with them. And that can be, you know, water problems, sewage problems, et cetera, because if you have a bunch of houses and all of a sudden the wells go bad or dry, or, you know, sewage problems, those houses, then it becomes our problem. So, you know, we like to please people when we can, and we need growth, but we got to be mindful the rules are there for reasons. And yes, tweaking, adjusting, but to ignore them comes with peril.
Thank you for those comments. Yep, Downey?
And one more point, if I may, Mr. Chair, would be around those discussion points. I think it would be helpful for staff too, because you might already have in mind what you're trying to get at, like what you want to hear, what you want people to be thinking of. So it's a way, it's not that you're leading the discussion, but you're kind of guiding. So that way, by using those prompts, you're helping the reader to give you feedback on what you're really looking for. So that's, so it's for your benefit as well.
Transparency.
That's right.
Okay, anything further on this discussion paper? I think I think people have had a good discussion around the table so far. I think as I would indicate, this is a kickoff point on this this process. And I think we've got a long way to go. And we just need to, one of the interesting things that either from this paper itself or even the previous, what we heard strategy so far is indicated that we don't necessarily have a consistent view across the county. And maybe this is, something that we need to address through the process. Of course, we need to respect everybody's individuality and each local municipal partner's growth plans, but at the same time, yeah, to achieve the overarching goal of the county official plan, we need something that would work for everyone.
Yeah, I think the discussion paper is a good one, Ed, and I think it covers a lot of the things. There's the odd spot where I just want to make sure that everyone reading it would understand, that they realize what is being talked about. Sometimes we get complacent because we're used to discussing it and not everyone necessarily understands what's being said. But I think you're right. There is a discrepancy among the various municipalities as to what they want based, of course, on their ability to service or not service areas. I just think it's really important that with this one too, that we follow, like, I'm sorry that provincial policy has become laxer personally. It was before, it was much stronger and they have changed it. And I think that makes it a little harder for us as a county to set the standards that we think are important.
Yeah, I thank you for those comments. Does anyone have anything further to offer on that discussion paper number 1? Yep, Nancy?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I've heard lots of good comments today, so I think I will do a little tweaking with respect to the preamble or the introduction. And we'll hopefully get to a point where when we bring it to council, we'll have a little bit more robust preamble that deals with the issues that you've raised.
Thank you for that. Okay, hearing nothing further, we have a proposed motion before us that reads that be resolved that the discussion paper be approved as amended, that a copy of the discussion paper be circulated to the local municipal partners for their review and consideration, and that staff present the discussion paper along with the public feedback for council, to council for the direction and policy options regarding full and partial service. Is anyone willing to move and second that? Moved by Councillor Jiguer, seconded by
Sally?
Warden Marks. He had his hand up first, Sally. All in favor?
Warden Marks,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiba.
Yes.
4-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Moving on with discussion paper number 2, provincial policy statement and provincial policy guideline changes. Nancy?
You, Mr. Chair, this discussion paper focuses on provincial policy statement 2020 and any recent changes as a result of that, and any possible policy direction and changes to the county official plan. Next steps would include circulation to the public and feedback, especially with respect to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, who will be engaged and circulated specifically these proposed draft policy changes. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you for that introduction, Nancy. Any comments regarding the provincial policy statement and changes? Yep, Donna, please.
It's starting to rain here. I hope you can still hear me. I'm just wondering, I did get notice of that a few weeks ago of these changes. Nancy, are you saying they're draft at the PPS 8 stage?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the PPS 2020 was actually, the new PPS was adopted in May of last year. so May 2020. So those policy changes are now in place. So this report is as a result of those policy changes that are now in place. And the table that's been provided is a draft of what potentially the county plan could change as a result of those PPS changes. Through you, Mr. Chair, there's several major themes within the PPS 2020 that are difficult to incorporate and encapsulate in our official plan. So unfortunately, we're in an interesting, we seem to be the first of all the municipalities that are doing amendments at this time ahead of a lot of other municipalities. So there's not a lot to draw on, for instance, when it comes to things like a changing climate. That's a very broad statement, and it's very difficult to find spots or places that potentially we could insert the type of verbiage. So it's very important then, I think, that as part of the second phase of this, when we do public circulation, we also ensure that the ministry is aware of, and hopefully they can provide some guidance as well in terms of where are we seeing, or where potentially could we see these types of changes to incorporate those broad policy topics. So.
Okay, thank you. Nancy, would you describe the 2020 PPS as more permissive than prescriptive?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would categorize it as more permissive overall. I think the government has attempted to allow more flexibility in this PPS, as is shown by several of the discussion areas. More flexibility when it comes to certain things like the servicing hierarchy, some of the other major topics that were identified. But at the same time, there are certain things that have also been reinforced. For instance, like a changing climate, the discussion on agri-food systems, basically anything that would protect human health and hazard, those sorts of things have been strengthened, I feel. But overall, I think that there is certainly an element of flexibility that's been added to this PPS.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I appreciate Councillor Martin's comments earlier about perhaps being a little vaguer in there some areas. So yes, I think it's a trade-off that allows each region to perhaps adopt growth plans or whatever that more suitable to their area, rather than a cookie cutter approach. But there certainly is left to a wide variety of interpretation. I think there are some opportunities there for, I say, a little out of the box thinking.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as well. Some of the language has also been changed in terms of from shall to should, things like that. So those subtle changes also change a lot of the interpretation and application of those sorts of things. So certainly that's been a wholesale change as well to the PPS.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments from anyone? Dominique?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure, okay. I wasn't sure if Sally was going. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was wondering if maybe similar to the first discussion paper, if we could do discussion points at the beginning of this one as well. So some prompts and things to pay attention to and to notice, or, food for thought. And yeah, if there are any areas where you're looking for a particular reaction, I think that would be beneficial to set the stage for the reader as well. And wondering if sometimes there's room for explaining the implications or the consequence. And because sometimes we go from one sentence, we just change the words, which seems pretty straightforward. So instead of transportation, we put supportive transportation, so it matches the OP or the PPS. But what's the implication of that? The fact that we add the word supportive, is it as easy as just changing a word? So sometimes maybe not for every amendment, but some of them where, yeah, it feels like, wait a minute, it's one thing to change a word, but what are the possible implications of those words? must mean something, otherwise they wouldn't have been added, right?
I get your point. I do. To me, I guess where the conflict arises, from my interpretation is that the PPS is the overall planning document from the province. We don't control that, but we control what we do with Elgin's, official plan and how we interpret the official plan or policies or even passages and how do they fit under this umbrella. And with it being so broad, I think it creates a lot of opportunity. And so I'm thinking that, from what you are suggesting, when it comes down to things such as, servicing options or climate change, how do we adopt that into our plans? And I don't know, it seems to me the sky's the limit when you look at the PPS and, when you're talking about, for example, changing, references to changing climate with a focus on adaptation, or like, what does that mean? Green roofs, does that mean, more robust storm water management? Does that mean, like, 250-foot depth wells? I don't know, like aquifer wells. What does that mean? And, I don't know if there's any sense of, interpretation or definition within or coming from the province on that. So Nancy, you're in a better position to answer that than I am.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's those pieces that are going to be the most difficult to incorporate into our official plan, because obviously, you're right, you could go in almost any direction. You could add in the simple sentence of a changing climate.
Yeah.
And technically, does that mean we met the policies, So it's going to take some careful consideration for certain. And we, like I said, we have attempted to try to, like, for instance, climate change. For sure, stormwater management is probably, when someone thinks of climate change, that's one of the major impacts in terms of on the ground impacts. So we've attempted to now update some of our stormwater management policies with respect to that. But there are certainly potentially other places that maybe I never even really considered that potentially could be added in terms of, a changing climate. And so that's why the next stage in terms of circulation and discussion with the public, they may be able to, come up with alternatives or some other considerations that hadn't been noticed before. So that's going to be an important step, I think. And going back to Councillor Giguère's comments about possible implications, we did add a column that's implementation considerations, and I think we attempted as best as we could to kind of incorporate. This is essentially what that implementation would consider. I'll certainly review it before we release it to council, just to see if there's anything that maybe could be further added with the implications of those changes. We'll see if we can't tighten or clean that up a little bit.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Dominic?
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean, to Warden Mark's remark earlier about trying to make sure we're aware of the decisions we're making and the implications for the future. If there's anything you need to flag, this, by the way, and because you're right, there's some of that and those explanations in the implementation consideration, but if I'm looking for some help in interpreting some of the potential long-term commitments that we're making by changing a word here and there. And yeah, especially for the column where we are choosing to adopt some of the new language. Like, okay, what are we getting ourselves into by doing that, right?
Agreed. Any other comments?
Yeah, I was going to speak earlier. I confused Dominic. Central Elgin Environmental Committee has been working with our planning department on climate change policies. They have a paper that they're going to be presenting to council, to Central Elgin Council later, and then with the idea that they will then present it to, send it to the county so that they're aware of what we're considering are items that should be considered to adapt to and mitigate climate change. So it is a tough one. It's a brand new item. We're just doing what we can. We've been looking at various other municipalities and counties and what they've been doing to date to give us some ideas, but just so that you know that that will be coming from our environmental committee and Central Elgin.
Thank you for that. So yeah, like the environment definitely is an important thing for consideration long-term. Another thing within the provincial policy statement is talks about the encouragement of renewable energy resources and the development thereof. You know, it's something that we have to balance, I think, fairly well. We've got areas in the community that don't want renewable energy, and that's fine. Other areas who've embraced them. You know, and then perhaps we've got some stuff that we really don't want, but we've got at the same time. Thinking of terms of some natural gas facilities. But the point being that as the second tier from a planning perspective, which the county's official plan is, I think we need to be cognizant of it, but we also have to be mature enough that we can grow within the environment that the province is allowing us to do by the permissive nature and still be aware of the long-term implications of what we do. And I think that's what you were getting at, Dominique. Yeah. Donna?
Just a question to Nancy, that when I read the PPS, the OP, and then the lower tiers OPs, and then the direction of shall be consistent with, so that to me means they all have to be the same, and yet they are different. And if they are different, we do have opportunities to appeal. Exactly how does that interpret to the citizen as to the lower tiers must be consistent with the upper tier OP, which must be consistent with the province, but allowing for differences? It's very, to me, very confusing.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's the balancing act, I feel, of planning overall, is that, as Councillor Ketchba had indicated, every municipality has different priorities, for instance, or perhaps different considerations when it comes to certain topics. I think overall, the PPS sets the standard for certain policy issues that need to be addressed. And then also with the allowances of the shall versus should, the should versus shall, for instance, allows that interpretation in terms of criteria that can be applied. So there are going to be differences. The county also would then reflect what the PPS policies require. And then from that, every municipality has the ability to interpret or add criteria, for instance, with respect to certain issues or topics or policies. But it's always going to come down to any planning application that occurs needs to show consistency with the PPS, the county plan, and the lower tier municipalities. And although there may be a little bit of, like different criterias applied at different levels, overall, there are certain, I guess you could say, must-do statements like agriculture needs to be protected, environment needs to be sustained and protected. Those sorts of things will always be a ribbon that goes through all three of those policy documents.
A question, Ed.
Yes, please.
It had concerned me previously. I was told that the provincial policy overrides the county official plan, and the county official plan technically overrides the local municipal official plans. In other words, the local municipal official plans have to be in line with the counties, and the county has to be in line with the provincial policy. But that didn't seem to be the case in the previous one, because there were certain municipalities that had policies that were contrary to the county official plan. And I'm curious, is that the correct hierarchy or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, that is the correct hierarchy. I think the issue is that Elgin County didn't develop their official plan until 2013. So certainly all the lower tier municipalities had official plans that have predated by many years. So there's a lot of long-term, like for instance, settlement areas. There's a lot of settlement areas that maybe potentially wouldn't these settlement areas if it wasn't for the fact that the lower tier had recognized it. So there's that balancing act of recognizing, longstanding issues or longstanding scenarios. But at the same time, still striving to update all of our official plans to reflect the latest PPS county plan as well as lower tiers. So it's never a perfect fit, but you are correct that the interpretation is that the PPS is tantamount and then flowing from that, the county plan and then the lower tiers as well, which need to all be in agreement with each other.
Yes, Donna?
Yeah, I understand that the county didn't have one previously, but now that they do have, so that I find it interesting this year then the timing of all the official plans. So I believe Dutton Dunwich has already gone through the process and they've already adopted it. But we're still in the process of the upper tier. So if it is not consistent with, then they will have to change that to be consistent with the upper tier when we're finished with it this year, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. So actually,
Okay.
as these plans are coming forward, there's a caveat that we put in each one that
Oh,
basically
okay,
indicates we're allowing you to move forward with this official plan amendment as it stands right now. However, be noting that in the future, once the county plan changes, you will likely need to be doing some sort of housekeeping amendments or a series of amendments to bring it in line with the county plan.
okay.
So the problem is that there's the pandemic. Everyone essentially were doing the process and then a lot got stalled and now everyone's catching up. So in a perfect world, the county plan would be the first one to go, but unfortunately, this is an unprecedented time. So and recognizing that lower tier municipalities also want to move forward with their plans. So certainly we've allowed them to do that, to adopt their policies and then noting that in the future, there may need to be a change depending on what occurs through our plan.
Okay,
So that's why Central Elgin have held off and won't be adopting ours till the county adopts theirs.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we appreciate that.
meanwhile, Bayham went through the exercise in 2019. So. Yep, Tom?
Go ahead or behind?
I don't know. There are days. But it is interesting and I'm sure everyone is well aware that the plans, the closer you are to the local resident, meaning the local municipal partner, their plans are more prescriptive than, say, the county's overall plan than the province's plan. So it's more vague as you go up the levels.
Through you, Mr. Chair, exactly. For instance, there will be criteria. A perfect example of this is the consents policies, which have different criteria in each of the different municipalities, especially when it comes to things like surplus farm dwellings. There are additional criteria that are contained in some of the partner municipalities. And those types of things then change it vastly. So when, for instance, I'll get a call on a potential severance, I have to consider as well that local policy that may be different than another municipality. So it makes it interesting and certainly the criteria themselves should be incorporated into the partner municipalities official plans because the county is meant to be more broader. Another good example of that is the renewable energies. So one would assume that we would have policy that would permit renewable energies across the county. However, some of the municipalities, for instance, like Dutton Dunwich has recently passed, have removed the ability or have really tightened up the criteria basically with respect to allowing renewable energy. And when I say renewable energy, I mean large scale wind.
Wind turbines. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing prevents them from doing that in their local official plan.
Any more discussion points on this discussion paper? Seems to me that this committee has been really efficient this morning. We haven't quite got an hour in yet. Okay, again, this will be circulated to the lower tiers, excuse me, local municipal partners, as well as going to council for endorsement moving forward. Yes. Everybody's good. All right. We have a proposed motion that reads that resolve that the discussion paper be approved as amended. That it be circulated to the local municipal partners for their review and consideration. And that a copy of the discussion paper be circulated to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for preliminary policy feedback. Anyone willing to move and second? Councillor Jiguer will move. Warden Marks will second. All in favor?
Warden Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiba.
Yes.
4-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Moving on with the agenda, then we have correspondence. Is there any correspondence today? Which brings us then to the date of our next meeting.
Ed,
Oh, Donna?
I just didn't know if, people would be interested, or maybe they already know, that there is another funding potential from the province for infrastructure with the high speed. So the government of Ontario has committed $4 billion in infrastructure, and they have an information session on July 28th. And so one of the companies that has approached me to see if I would help them with their proposal, but I wanted to bring that to the attention because that's quite a considerable amount of money available.
Thank you for that, Donna.
It's tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Perfect. County's on top of it. Anything further then? We're at new business. Apparently half minutes have things that the agenda doesn't, but that's all right. Date of the next meeting. We are scheduled for August, I assume?
Through you, Mr. Chair, looking at our discussion papers, our next one would be the Elgin Natural Heritage System Strategy and Environmental Policies.
Yep.
So identified that RIPA would be the week of August 30th,
Okay.
and then to target council September 14th. So
Do we need to refine it any more than that today, or are we going to deal with this over through a doodle pool or? I guess that's poll, not pool, but
Summer.
it's summer, yeah. Does anybody have any preferences?
All of the chair.
Call of the chair.
I certainly prefer morning meetings to afternoon, that's all.
Absolutely. Appreciate that.
Tuesdays are generally,
Tuesdays are generally better. For me as well. You haven't got anything on your calendar yet, Mr. Warden?
You know,
Your calendar is 1 week at a time, right?
day at a time.
Day at a time. Perfect. Tentatively then, what is the date for that Tuesday of that week?
It would be the 31st, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to schedule for 9 a.m.?
With me.
Does that work for you, Donna?
So far,
Might be participating from the pickup truck again, right?
maybe so. It's kind of nice to be able to get out with grandkids after a year of not being able to.
Understood. Yeah. All right, then tentatively Tuesday, August 31st, 9 a.m. If there's nothing further, then I would call for a motion for adjournment. Moved by the warden. Seconded by
Sally,
Sally. All in favor?
Gordon Marks.
Yes.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
yes.
Counselor Ketchival.
Yes.
Your motion carries.
Well, thank you all. Again, the efficiency of the committee, we're 58 minutes ahead of schedule.